who is a research librarian in the East Asian Department of Berlin State Library, who's going to be talking about questions of network analysis in late Choson, Korea. So that will be something very much to look forward to. Today, however, as you all know, we are hosting Dr. Barbara McGillivray, who is a lecturer in Digital Humanities and Cultural Computation in the Department of Digital Humanities at King's College London, where she also convenes their very famous and long-standing, I've just learned, MA in Digital Humanities. Before teaching at KCL, she was based at the Turing Institute and is the author of many articles and book chapters on topics related to computational linguistics, especially as it relates to Latin. I particularly commend to you her recent book, Methods in Latin Computational Linguistics, which is a fantastic guide to the topic. Today, however, she's going to be talking to us on the topic of uncovering word meaning change in texts with computational models. So without further ado, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for the invitation, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. I've prepared a presentation that gives you an overview of my recent research, and I've prepared it to cater for an audience with different multidisciplinary backgrounds. But yeah, feel free to delve into more technical details in the Q&A. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Right. So I trust you can see my slides full screen now. And yeah, so I will start with a little video to sort of break the ice and start with something a little bit lighthearted. It's got subtitles. I hope you can sort of follow, and I will be commenting on it in a minute. Let me know if you can't hear the sound, but it should be working okay.
I bought something from you last week, and I'm very disappointed.
Oh, yeah? What's the problem?
Yeah, well, my BlackBerry is not working.
What's the matter? Run out of juice?
No, it's completely frozen.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. I'll tell you what, let's try it on orange.
That's got a few black spots, you see.
Oh, dear, yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. Was there anything I do to get my BlackBerry working?
Well, it could be an application issue. But where'd you store that BlackBerry?
It's on my desktop.
Well, you could try using a mouse to drag the BlackBerry to the trash. Then after you've done that, you might want to launch the BlackBerry from the desktop.
Okay, so you can continue watching in your own time. But yeah, I hope I could have made you laugh a little bit. This video, I think, is very nicely acted video where the actors play with domain language and polysemy, so polysemic effects in language where words can be used with different meanings depending on context. So you have BlackBerry, of course, as fruit, but also BlackBerry as the phone device. You have words like frozen or desktop or mouse that are sort of everyday words, but that in a computing settings have very peculiar meanings, as we all know. So it just shows how really language ambiguity and polysemy is all around us, and it can be used to find effects. But really, the fact that language, let me switch to my slides. Yeah, so the fact that language and words change their meaning all the time is something that, of course, has no time. It's always happened in language, and it affects all languages. This is an example that comes from English, where the word bully used to be used in a sort of positive term. So if you look up the word bully in the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the authoritative historical dictionary of English, I actually happen to work for the Oxford English Dictionary, so I have a particularly personal link to it. But what this dictionary does, it gives you, of course, the different meanings of a word ordered chronologically. And so you see the first definition says a term of endearment. So it's something positive that people used to tell other people when addressing them. But then, of course, today, bully has a negative connotation. And if you look it up in the Oxford Dictionary of English, which is the kind of current dictionary of English, you see it says a person who seeks to harm others. So how did that change happen? And how can we sort of automatically detect this? Well, these are the questions that have particularly concerned me in the past few years. And the phenomenon of what we call semantic change, so the phenomenon whereby words change their meaning over time, is definitely quite a complex one that I would define as non-linear and fuzzy. Non-linear because the change doesn't happen as a sort of at a constant pace. There are moments where words tend to change faster, moments where they don't change at all. And it's fuzzy in the sense that the different meanings of words are not always very clear categories or boxes where you can sort of clearly identify. Sometimes what meaning a word has in a context is a bit of subject of debate. So you can imagine that having a complex, fuzzy, nonlinear phenomenon is something particularly challenging if we want to address it with computers. And that's why this makes it into a very interesting computational challenge. So in both my first and my second book actually talk quite a lot about disciplinary silos and the fact that we have quite established, more or less established communities in academia that are concerned with their own research questions, but there is often not so much communication between them. Of course, as digital humanists, we're all about interdisciplinarity, so we know very well the importance, but also the challenges of working with people from different disciplinary backgrounds. And I, to some extent, what I wrote here in 2017 is still current, but maybe has sort of started to be addressed. So I say the scholarly communities of natural language processing, digital humanities, and corpus linguistics would benefit from a deeper level of interaction and awareness of each other's fields. And this is something I also tried to address in my third book about language technology and humanities, because really it is when we gather around problems that we can sort of and bring together methods from different disciplines that we can really hope to make important progress. And semantic change is an area where this interdisciplinary collaboration really makes a difference, as I hope I will be able to show you today. So in natural language processing, the area of semantic change detection has attracted quite a lot of interest in recent years. This is just a sample of few of the many papers that have been produced in the past about 10, 15 years on this topic. But many more are currently constantly being written, which shows that is something that still is not a fully resolved challenge, but one that computational linguists have taken and kind of started owning recently. Of course, historical linguists have been studying the phenomenon of semantic change for much longer and have come up with theories and hypotheses. But really it is when the two disciplines come together, I believe, that we can really take a significant step forward. So how do we try and teach computers to help us understand and identify a phenomenon that is so complex? Well, the key is in the so-called distributional hypothesis. If you're not familiar with this term, this is a hypothesis or a starting point that has been sort of put forward by several people, but most famously by Firth. The quote, "You shall know a word by the company it keeps," is very often cited because it very nicely summarizes the point of the distributional hypothesis, which is that in order to understand the meaning of a word, we need to look at how it is used. And by that, I mean the other words that it tends to occur with. So for example, if I don't know a word, but I can see it used in context, I can easily guess a lot of the properties of that word about its meaning. It's something that, of course, is not completely new. The idea that we need to look at the usage of words was around well before Firth, and it is in line with traditional philology, where we don't look at words in isolation. We look at how they're used by different authors in different texts and so on. But the way Firth put it so simply, so clearly, has been picked up by computational researchers. And the distributional hypothesis has really opened up a whole field within computational linguistics called distributional semantics, where the distributional hypothesis is operationalized and so used for computing semantic meaning level similarities between words. So this has led to the development of technologies like word embeddings. So the idea of a word embedding, if you're not familiar with it, is that we can represent words as geometric objects, so-called vectors. So we can imagine that you have a space, like a geometric space, maybe a two-dimensional space for simplicity, and each word is associated with a point in space, or more precisely with the direction from the origin to that point. So what we can do then is look at how close together words are, and then interpret this geometric proximity in semantic terms. So words that tend to be in similar areas in the geometric space also tend to share some elements of their meaning. And if you expand this to more than 2 dimensions, because we as humans cannot visualize more than 3 dimensions, but we can imagine how this kind of works in more dimensions, then you have that for each word you have a vector, and a vector is basically a sequence of numbers. And so you can do calculations on these sequences of numbers, and you can infer semantic properties from them. So how do we define these sequences of numbers? Well, we take the word, for example, cat, and we take all instances of usage of that word. So all the sentences in our corpus of text where that word is used. We tend to typically focus on a context window, so a certain number of words to the left and to the right of our target word. And then we gather all this data, and we start to create these vectors which capture the sort of distributional profile of this word. In the early days, these vectors were directly interpretable as precise frequencies. You could say, okay, I collect all the words in my corpus, and then the first number of each vector represents how many times that word occurs with word A, for example. The second one will be how many times the word occurs with the verb to be, and so on. Nowadays, these vectors are much less interpretable because they are the result of neural network algorithms that are not so transparent, but the end result is still valid, that these vectors incorporate information about the semantics of the words, so that we can make calculations on these words and interpret them semantically. A very famous example is the analogy case, where you can draw analogies between words. So, for example, you can have, you can look at the vector for puppy and the vector for dog, and then see that actually they are in a relationship to each other that is similar to the relationship between kitten and cat. So you can do that with, say, countries and capital cities. You can even have a gender version where you have, for example, the case of queen and woman. Queen is to woman like king is to man. So you can see how this technology is very powerful, because it allows us to transfer geometrical computation into meaning level interpretation. And this has been adopted in semantic change research. The first one to do that, at least in a big scale, was Hamilton and William Hamilton and his supervisors at the time. They published a paper where they employed word-to-vec embeddings to study the evolution of meaning of certain words in English, but in other languages as well. And they used the Google Books corpus for this. The intuition was that we can trace the change meaning of a word by looking at the embeddings of the same word over time. So here you see 3 examples of 3 words that in English changed their meaning in the past century or so. And what you can see is that each word in each period is represented by a pointy space. So, for example, in the figure on the left, you see the word gay in the 1900s, then in the 1950s, and in the 1990s. And then the words around the target word, gay in this case, are words that were semantically similar and distributionally similar to our target word in different times. And these words are called neighbors, and they basically end up in similar regions of the space, in our semantic space, because they tend to share similar contexts with our target word. And so you see things like sweet and cheerful being similar to gay in the 1900s, and then the neighbors changing over time to point to a semantic shift of the word. A maybe less known example is the broadcast, the figure in the middle, where you can see that in the 1850s, it was a word that meant spreading seeds, basically, in the fields. But then in the 1900s, the word started being used in the context of distributing newspapers. So you can see a sort of metaphorical shift here. And then in the 1990s, you see radio, television, BBC, so a more television media context. So even if you're not a linguist, and I don't expect that many linguists in the audience, I hope you can appreciate the value of this type of research well beyond linguistics in helping us trace cultural changes, also social cultural changes via the analysis of shifts in meaning of words. In fact, semantic change research has been conducted in the context of intellectual history and history of concepts by several researchers, because these methods, even though they're quite rough, they do give us empirical evidence and quantifiable evidence of a shifting meaning of words, which we can then use for further analysis that sort of analyzes the evolution of actual concepts. So there is a, for example, study on the notion of nation over time by looking at its semantic evolution and its shifts in meaning. And so these are techniques that are really increasingly being used in history, but also other fields. So if my background is in classics, and of course, whenever we look at language change, it has a cultural counterpart, and we can interpret these shifts in the context of the kind of changing institutional, religious, cultural context. And I'll give you some more examples later on. So how do we practically apply these methods in semantic change research? Well, the idea is that we have a corpus of text that typically covers a period of time. We call it diachronic corpus in linguistics. What matters is that, yes, we are interested in a sort of in a span of time. It doesn't have to be very long. It could be centuries, decades, but even years or months. The important thing is that it covers the period we're interested in, and that we expect some change to have happened. So we tend to split the corpus into periods. So it could be a before and after split, where you're interested in a change in a particular, for a particular event. Or the examples could be study that I recently did on the Brexit referendum. So before and after Brexit referendum, we would have two different corpora, and then we'd look at the change in language as resulting of this. Or you can have people have looked at, for example, the Christianity, the effect of Christianity in Latin, so or ancient Greek even, and looked at these two different eras. It is really depending on your research question. And then what you do is you take each corpus as a separate corpus on which you create your semantic space. So in technical terms, this is called training the embeddings. And the idea is that you just take the corpus in isolation and you look at the way words are used in that corpus, and you sort of plot the embedding, so the vectors of the words you're interested in the space. So you'll have words that behave similarly, ending up in similar regions of the space. And so imagine you're interested in, as in this example, in the 1850s, 1900s, and 1990s. We'll have these three different corpora, and you'll have three different semantic spaces, each of them referring to its own period and showing how words were used at the time. But then these spaces are not directly comparable as they stand, because they've been created completely independently. So there is a process of so-called alignment of spaces, which aims at basically making the spaces comparable. So the idea is that after this alignment, I can get into kind of more technical details if you're interested in the Q&A. But the idea is after this alignment, we are in the position of tracing the vector of the same word across time, so across these three different semantic spaces, for example. So what we do is then say, okay, a word of interest, say, is broadcast. We'll look at the embedding of word broadcast in the first time period, look at its embedding in the second time period, and compare them and see if they are similar or not. And then look at the third period as well. And if we see a significant change in the embedding, then we can interpret this as a potential semantic change instance. And the way this change is calculated is, there can be different ways. Very frequently, people calculate the so-called cosine distance. You don't need to sort of appreciate all the technical details, but it is a way to measure the distance between vectors, or you can also look at the neighbors and look at how much they overlap. But the important thing is that it is an effective way to capture macroscopic changes in the way words change their meaning. We did, we ran a competition in 2020 where we asked different teams that were participating in this competition to develop algorithms that would be evaluated against some so-called gold standard data sets. So we prepared clean sort of data sets for 4 languages: English, German, Latin, and Swedish. I took care of the Latin part. And for each language, we had a corpus and we had a time period. To keep things simple, we just had 2 time periods. So for Latin, for example, was before the Christian era and after Christian era. And then we had a list of words for which we knew that there had been change between these 2 time periods, and a list of control words that had not changed. And then we gave the corpus to the participating teams, and they had to develop an algorithm that would predict which words had changed and which words hadn't changed in the time. And on the right, you see the table that shows the performance of the different teams. So every line corresponds to a different team. Then we had some baselines, so the models that were sort of used by us to as baselines. And what you can see is the first column shows the average accuracy, so the percentage of words that were correctly predicted as having changed. And you can see that even the best possible model reached an accuracy of only 68.7%. So really, it's much better than random or than some sort of very basic baseline model. But it shows how complex a task is and how much room for improvement there is. On the last column, by the way, you can see the type of models, the type of algorithms that people used. And I can go into more details, but the main difference is between type embeddings, which are embeddings like word2vec, where each word is represented as a vector, and token embeddings, which are embeddings like BERT, if you're familiar with the term, where each occurrence of a word corresponds to a vector. But again, this is a technical difference that isn't particularly crucial to getting the main message. The main message being that, there is definitely a room for improvement, but these models also reach a good level of accuracy. Now I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of different projects that I've been leading on applying these methods to different languages, very different time periods, and sort of research contexts. I'll start the oldest data I've worked on, which is on ancient Greek, which led to the publications you see here, and you're very welcome to check them out for more details. But the idea is that this was a project that was funded initially by the Alan Turing Institute, and it was a interdisciplinary team involving classicists, computer scientists, a statistician, digital humanist, and myself. And we wanted to really test these models on an ancient language. At the time, no one had done that. So we had to start by building a corpus. And so we built the Diorisis Ancient Greek corpus. So if you work on ancient Greek, this you might want to check it out if you don't know it already. But it is a corpus that covers basically, many different centuries and 10 million words. What we looked at to sort of prepare for this study was certain words that we knew had different meanings, but also their distribution in different genres, because one thing that sort of NLP and natural language processing researchers hadn't thought of, or at least hadn't incorporated in their models back then, was a sort of awareness of the fact that different genres and different text types lead to different meanings, and that this needs to be taken into account whenever doing semantic change research. So here we take the example of the word mus, which in ancient Greek can mean mouse, as in the animal, or it can mean muscle, as in the anatomical part, or it can mean muscle, as in the shellfish. And depending on whether we have narrative texts or more technical treatises and so on, we see the distribution of these different senses or meanings of the word being different. And that is to some extent independent of the kind of shift over time. So our light bulb idea moment was, oh, well, we really need to consider genre into our model. And so what we did was we started from a model that had been proposed before. And to the left, you see an image showing an example of how this model was applied to power. So this was proposed by Leah Freeman and Mirella Lapata in 2016. And they applied it to English. So this was a Bayesian learning model that was basically a topic model, where you would use just the information about how a word is used, so its distribution, to predict the probability of each of its meanings over time. So just to guide you through this figure, every kind of bar corresponds to a time period, so from 1700s all the way to 2000. So it's 20-year intervals, and each bar is split into different colors. Each color corresponds to different meaning of the word. You can see that over time, the different meanings change their probability. So you see, for example, the violet bars being very, very small or non-existent early on, but then becoming bigger over time. And the purple or violet bars correspond to this meaning number 6, which is basically the meaning that refers to power as energy. And this is interesting because it corresponds to our knowledge that, around the time of the Industrial Revolution, of course, there was an increased usage of this word power to refer not to government or political power or power of love, etc., but to power as in energy. And so this was a model that, of course, knew nothing about the Industrial Revolution, but used the way the word power was used in different time periods to infer its different meanings and how they changed over time. So on the right, you see quite a complex, or at least, a bit daunting pseudocode. Don't need to understand the details, but what I circled in red is the main thing, because what we did is we adapted this model to be genre aware. In other words, we wanted a model not just to tell us what was the probability of a word meaning in each time period, but also to tell us what was its probability by genre. So if I have a technical text, what's the probability of this word at this point in time, and so on. If I have a religious text, what is its probability? And so by doing this change, we were able to make our model so-called genre aware. So let's take an example. We looked at the word paradisos, which used to mean garden, but then acquired the word of paradise, the meaning of paradise. So it's a slight shift in meaning, of course, because paradise was the garden of Eden. So it's related to the word to the meaning garden, but it was an important shift that, of course, points to kind of religious context in ancient Greek. So what we did was we had not just a split by time, which you can see in the different bars, but also split by genre. And for simplicity, we just split by religious, non-religious texts. And then we looked at the change in the different meanings over time, and you could see the difference between religious texts where the sense of paradise sort of appears, and the non-religious ones where it is much less sort of prominent. And we measured the performance of our method, which we call GASC, for genre-aware semantic change, with other methods that were not genre-aware, and we found that it was doing better. So this was a nice result because it shows that by actually incorporating more knowledge into the model, the algorithm, we could actually get better results. And that type of knowledge was knowledge that was sort of expert-induced in the form of an awareness of the genre, which is a very important aspect whenever looking at meaning, particularly in historical texts. Of course, when we use contemporary texts or when we use more recent data, we can maybe even ignore genre in the sense that we could create a corpus that is balanced by genre. But for ancient language like ancient Greek, we don't have that luxury because we just have the text that we have, and we can't really exclude some texts because they give an unbalanced representation of genres. So we had to embrace this richness and make it part of the model. Going a little forward, I'll just talk about a couple of papers that were focusing on Latin. So in this work, we decided to focus on socio-political terms. So terms that were referring to changing institutions in ancient and early medieval society. So words that had high frequency, so had a lot of data, but that were, for this reason, difficult to analyze by hand because we had so much data. So we used a corpus that I built a few years ago called Latinize, and we split it into 3 time periods up to so from 450 before Christian era to the end of the Christian era, then the first 450 years, and then 450 to 900. So these rough three rough time periods with different sizes, of course, and a very different kind of profiles, historically speaking. Then we wanted to apply these methods, and of course it's quite challenging to be working on this level of time span. And what we looked at was also the evidence from dictionaries. So typically in kind of qualitative closed reading research, scholars would refer to historical dictionary. In the case of Latin, it's the Thesaurus Lingua Latinae, which traces the different meanings of a word over time with quotations by different authors. Now you could argue, why do we need to even bother with all this computational research when we have dictionaries that already tell us the evolution of meaning of a word? The reason is that these dictionaries don't give us a quantitative overview. They will list examples, but we have no idea, how prominent a meaning was at a certain point in time, and its distribution. We don't have the actual data to do quantitative analysis. So that's why computational method is complementary to a more close reading one. But this table shows you the different meanings of this word. We focused on civitas, which meant citizenship or Roman citizenship, and then changed to mean city. And that gave rise to similar words in Romance languages like città in Italian or cité in French. And so this complex table just shows you how these different meanings were tested at different points in time. And so there wasn't really a clear linear shift that cleanly happened where when one meaning took over and the previous one disappeared. It's more a question of changing and shifts in sort of relative probability in a way, and coexistence of different meanings, and then meanings fading away. And so we looked at the way civitas was used in these different time periods. And even a simple method like a collocation analysis, where we just look at the words that tend to occur with our target word, gives us some idea of the shift that we're looking at. But then looking at more kind of embedding and more advanced methods, the shift is even clearer. So here you can see the neighbors of the word civitas in the three different time periods that we analyzed. This is all in Latin, but don't worry, I'll translate it. So the words in the first box are words that clearly point to the meaning of citizenship. So you have gens for like people, or libertas for liberty, societas for society. So we have sort of abstract terms that have to do with a more institutional aspect of a meaning of citizenship for civitas. But then in the second and third box, you see words that are more concrete and more related to geographical entities. So you have urbs, which means city. Oppidum is another word for city. Murus is wall. Porta is gate. And so you have words that clearly point to the word civitas being used in a different context, one that points to city. So the change is quite clear, and it was completely automatically identified by these methods. So we're quite excited because we saw that these methods that were typically used with more recent data can actually be tested on very long time periods. And then shifting to very much more recent data, I'm going to show you some examples of projects I've worked on and led that were focused on contemporary English. So this was a collaboration with the British Library, which holds a big data set called the UK Web Archive, containing all web pages from UK domains, covering 1996 to 2013. So it's a recent data set, massive amount of data, and one that was really waiting to be exploited. When I worked at the Alan Turing Institute, I had the opportunity to work with the British Library, because this institute is actually inside the British Library, and spoke with the people in the web archiving team who are really keen to have a collaboration with the Alan Turing Institute, which is the British National Institute for Data Science and AI, because they had this massive archive that was really waiting to be analyzed. So we had to deal with the sheer size of the data. So we're starting with 60 terabytes of files in a particular web format that we had to clean and extract text from, to come down to 3 terabytes of tokens. Still a massive data set that we were working with. And then we developed an algorithm that is a variation of what I presented earlier. So we still worked on kind of splitting the corpus into time periods. In our case, it was years. So from 2000 to 2013, because the very early years had too little data. And then for each year, we had an embedding model, so semantic space, basically, where we could see the sort of the similarity between words. But then we added a change in the algorithm to deal with alignment. I can give you more details if you're interested in. But what's important is to show you the results. And this is a visualization of some words that our algorithm found as having changed in the data. And you see words that are related to the computing domain, and point us to the first video that I showed you earlier. So BlackBerry, of course, is in there. And you see the line goes up steeply because that measures the change in the meaning of the word, as measured in terms of the similarity or the dissimilarity between the embeddings of the same word over time. And then you see words like follow, which changed in a result of course, the social media meaning of following, as in following someone's updates on social media. Tablet is another one, of course, went from kind of concrete, maybe wooden tablet to the electronic device, and then tweet or cloud. These are examples that really resonate with us as words that changed and that were picked up by the algorithm. And here you can see the neighbors. So the words are similar to the different words in different time periods. So the one on top you see shows BlackBerry, and you see neighbors of BlackBerry in the early time period were things like gooseberry, raspberry, strawberry, so words that point to BlackBerry being fruit. But then in the blue words on the top left, see were words that were similar to BlackBerry in the second time period. And you see words that are related to smartphone, Android, and kind of phones. So clearly a big shift in the way the word BlackBerry was used in the data. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another study that used an even shorter time period. In this collaboration, still at the Alan Turing Institute with colleagues from Oxford and other universities, we wanted to look at a very short time span. We had a Twitter data set covering years 2012 to 2017, so 5.5 years of data. But we had a very big corpus, 20 billion tokens, 1.6 billion tweets. So we had to look at monthly changes. So we split our corpus not in years, but in months period. And we applied similar methods, and we trained embeddings, and here's what we found. So we found that certain words had changed their context of use and therefore were considered candidates for change. Vine is one of them. So in December 2012, and from December to January 2013, Vine really changed its meaning very rapidly. So the blue line shows the distance between the embedding of the word in a certain month and the embedding of the word of the word at the beginning of the time period. Whereas the red dotted line shows the frequency of the word, just to give you some context. But so that was a case of a change related to the fact that Vine was the name of a video hosting platform and that people, of course, were talking about, and was launched in January 2013. And that gave rise to this changing meaning of the word, because commonly Vine is, of course, very different, has a very different meaning. Another example is Glow, which was used in a rap song. And so the rap song actually was launched in August 2013. So that led to a big change again. And then another one is favorited, which was being used to refer to liking videos on YouTube. So you see the type of changes that we were able to detect were short-lived changes that were related to Twitter jargon. It's not really necessarily the lasting changes that linguists tend to think about when talking about semantic change, but nevertheless, changes that affected the Twitter language and that were picked up by algorithms. And then on the same data set, we also decided to focus on emoji because we were running this project at the Alan Turing Institute, and we thought, well, emoji are a unique opportunity to explore semantic change because we actually know when they came into being. You know, with a word, we don't know exactly when it was first used, but with emoji, we have the full data set. And of course, it helps us answer, you know, the big question, are emoji language, by answering a sub-question, which is, you know, how language-like are emoji, or how are they subject to semantic change like words? So we had a very similar data set to still tweets covering about 6 years, and we focused on 583 emoji. So we looked at the same method, training embeddings, but this time on emoji rather than on words, and then looking at to what extent they changed. And we found that only a small number of emoji actually appear to change, which is just like words. And the changes, of course, can happen at different points in time. And so we found that there were different clusters of emoji. So emoji that changed, that never changed, emojis that changed very gradually, and emojis that changed sort of very suddenly, or emojis that changed periodically. So it was very interesting because, yes, no one had really looked into the semantic change of emoji before. And there were some interesting cases of emoji that were changing periodically. For example, the basketball, which was, you know, changing in relation to the basketball season, or the pumpkin, of course, changing in relation to Halloween, and so on. So it was very enlightening because we could really show how emoji with semantics were not static, just like words, but some, or many actually, are quite stable, just like words. And of course, lots of more work to do on this topic. Yeah, do check it out. It's a paper that came out a couple of years ago with a co-author, Professor also Alex Robertson, who's now actually working for Google and was an expert in emoji. The last project I'm going to show you is a sort of next evolution of this idea of understanding semantic change. And it's a paper that I published last year, where I had this idea, can we actually use semantic change awareness to help us do a task that people normally don't sort of look at in a time-sensitive way? So offensive language detection is a very important task in natural language processing, because it allows us to automatically find language that is offensive, and therefore sort of provide more, you know, online safety to users. So it's a very, very important task. But of course, it relies on words and content and meaning, and words change their meaning, as we know very well. So the intuition was, can we kind of trace this change in meaning, and what effect does it have on offensive language detection? One example is, you know, Karen, which nowadays, or at least in very recent years, was used to refer to sort of middle-aged white woman that is, you know, racist attitudes. So, and this concept was actually referred to with different terms over time. So the idea was, can we have a semantic change model that taken two corpora can tell us which words changed in this time period, and then it informs an offensive language detection module, because it will alert us of the words that were not offensive but became offensive due to their change in meaning, or vice versa, were offensive and were stopped being offensive. And so we compiled a list of such words that sort of, again, became offensive or stopped being offensive. For example, Karen, or cancelled, in relation to the yeah, so someone is cancelled and sort of used as a threat in online context. And then we did various experiments to compare an offensive language detection algorithm that was aware of semantic change and one that wasn't. And we found that with the semantic change aware model, we could actually do a little better. So wanted to show that this semantic change research is really relevant, not just to humanists, but also to natural language processing researchers, because as language changes over time, making our models time sensitive is actually going to help. So this is all for me. I just want to finish with a few words about the journal that I'm editor-in-chief of, the Journal of Open Humanities Data, which is a journal, a data journal that publishes papers about data sets. So it's a relatively new concept because we focus precisely on publishing descriptions of data sets, and these papers are, of course, peer-reviewed and get DOI and everything, so they contribute to improve data sharing and reproducibility in the humanities. So here are my contact details, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, and it was great to hear about computational methods being applied to what do they call them? Underserved languages like Latin and Greek, of course. That's great. So we'll let you rest for a moment, but I've already started to get some questions in, and I have obviously lots of questions of my own. Maybe we'll start with that question of data sets and the wonderful journal that you're involved with. You mentioned that the various data sets that you've created are sort of publicly available. What are the sort of challenges in this space that you've, but for, individual researchers, especially if they're working in, an area of the humanities that hasn't received much attention from digital humanists?
The challenges of working with data sets in those areas.
Well, creating them, and then.
Yeah, well,
this is what we bump up against in my digital history lab, is that we have to actually create a lot of things from scratch, and it's horribly time consuming. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, thanks for the question. It gives me the opportunity to talk about a topic I'm really passionate about, because I actually have a past in academic publishing. I worked for Oxford University Press when I worked for the dictionaries, and then Springer Nature in the open access department. And so I witnessed firsthand the creation of the journal, the Scientific Data, which is a data journal for the sciences. And when I took over the editor-in-chief role of the Journal of Open Humanities Data, I was very passionate about transferring this concept of data papers onto the humanities, because it was a concept that really originated in the sciences, and many humanistic disciplines were quite new to this. And I can say that things are slowly changing. There are some objective challenges in dealing with and creating humanities data sets, in that there's a lot of, there can be problems with copyright issues and with kind of privacy issues, but also there's all the work that goes into curating these data sets that tends to be uncredited in humanities research, generally in research, and it's work that we're really trying to surface with this journal. The whole idea of a data paper is that it gives the creators of the data set credit for the work, and it's complementary to a traditional research paper that tends to focus more on the final results or the theoretical interpretation of the results, and less on the mechanics but the challenges of curating the data sets, because in fact it is all but easy and straightforward work. It's very hard work, as you said, Stuart, and work that needs to be noticed and credited. And so that's the whole point. We also see some challenges in not just properly crediting this work, but also this work being recognized, because there tends to be a bias towards traditional research outputs as opposed to data outputs. But this is also changing. So in the UK, for example, the research excellence evaluation framework, the REF there's increasing pressure to have non-standard outputs being recognized, and there are bigger efforts at the European level on practices for open research. And in the editorial board of the journal, also have representatives of researchers from outside Europe, because we really want to reach out and kind of engage with also non-Western researchers. So it is a bumpy ride, but one that is paying off. I mean, the journal has been growing. Took over, it was publishing one paper a year, and now it publishes about 30. And we also did a study which we published, where we looked at the impact of data papers on the citation of papers, and also on the visibility of data sets. So we have this so-called golden triangle, with the data set, the research paper, and the data paper. And we looked at to what extent the fact that a research paper has an associated data paper helps the citations of the research paper, and to what extent the fact that a data set has a data paper associated to it and contributes to more downloads and more views of the data set. So we found, quantitative evidence that this is really helping.
Oh,
sorry, this
that's great. No. It's a very important topic, and actually, I have something coming out in I guess a sort of a parallel journal called the Journal of Slavery and Data Preservation, which does,
yes, I know that. Yes.
Yeah, to do with baptism records from of slaves. Okay, so we have the questions coming in thick and fast. So maybe I'll sort of give you two at a time. Is that okay? Yeah. The first one is a student interested in semantic change of the word cancelled, sort of specifically, and then we have a question about so it's a longer one. I'm an undergraduate student, and I'm planning to conduct. Oh, sorry, just made that full screen. Sorry, I just lost it. I'm an undergraduate student. I'm planning to conduct a study using the word embeddings techniques. Can you point me to some useful resources? What skills do I need to acquire before conducting my analysis?
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with the last one. So the good news is that these techniques increasingly sort of easier to apply, because there are more and more tools available. So you don't need a degree in computer science, basically. But there are some technical aspects. And in fact, I did write a paper, which I'm going to dig out and point it to. It's called How to Use Word Embeddings. And I wrote it with humanities and social sciences readership in mind. So this is the link to the record. I put it in the chat. It is not open access, but there is a green open access version. So if you click on that link, you'll see there is a link, another link on the right, to PDF, which contains the accepted version of this paper. Well, it is not a real paper; it's a guide. It's part of the SAGE research methods guide. So it's practical. It's not so much like an academic output. It's more like a guide training. And so there I point to other resources. And other than that, there's that should give you an overview of the concept around word embeddings. And happy to point to specific resources. Get in touch, basically. In terms of the question about cancel, I was just thinking out my it was cancel, that's the word, the word. So we did a little bit of kind of curation around these words, and we found evidence of the sort of cancel culture, and so the effect of that on the semantics of the word cancel and cancelled as an adjective. And then so the change seemed to have happened around 2015. And it's attested in dictionary.com, for example. So we use that information as part of our algorithm. That's all I know about this word, but I'd be curious to sort of hear what you find.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So we have another question, I guess, related to your Twitter corpus. The student is basically asking about this sort of velocity of change, and he asks, what led to the decision to analyze the data on a monthly basis?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting, good question. So, of course, historical linguists have kind of theorized about the rate of change. But these methods actually give us some empirical data that we can use to sort of measure this rate of change. In fact, there are some papers in computational linguistics that measured the rate of change as one by Chaim Dubosarski. I'll just spell out his name. Dubosarski. He wrote a paper in 2017, I think, called Do Nouns Change More Than Verbs?, where he looked at the rate of change of different categories of words. It's very interesting because, it's not something that we've not been able to do quantitatively because of lack of this level of data. So we decided to work at the monthly level because we just had so much data and so few years that we thought if we work at the yearly levels, we're only going to have 5 data points. And the type of changes we are actually expecting likely to be quite rapid and volatile because, we were looking at social media. So we know that in social media, there are going to be trends that are sort of, that don't last long, but that are very very prominent for a short period of time. So that's it was a sort of heuristic and empirical approach. And it turned out to be a good choice. I would say if you're in doubt, you probably should, first think about the hypothesis you have and the sort of time frame. You can also do 6 months if for compromise, but then also you could try yearly, try monthly, see what changes you could pick up. In our case, we were unlikely to find any sort of change at the yearly level because they would just be cancelled out because within 1 year you would have a change and then no change, and so you'd be able to spot it.
And great. Okay, so we then have a question here about this is a good one. So most of the corpora you mentioned were one language only. What about cross-cultural digital humanities or multilingual digital humanities?
Oh yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, this is actually, it gives me the opportunity to mention a special collection that we currently have in the Journal of Open Humanities Data called Data and Workflows for Multilingual DH, guest edited by Lorella Viola. I can actually point you to it, but it is, I mean, we had an initial call for papers in October, but we're probably going to keep publishing on it because it is such an important topic. Yeah, here's the link. So the short answer is that this is kind of just started. Like the vast majority of the research in semantic change has been monolingual because it's already very hard. But I know some people have looked at kind of transferring one semantic space to another in 2 different languages and looking at using aligned or translated text to enable this mapping, and then looking within kind of the different portions, the different multilingual portions, to see how the words that were kind of translated were differing semantically. So yeah, I haven't myself done any multilingual research in this sense, but it is definitely coming, and it is definitely in people's minds because it is the next natural step. And it would enable those kind of cross-cultural interpretations that we talked about. Yeah, so I'm afraid I don't have any papers to point to yet, but definitely coming. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, this is actually something that interests me as well. We've the Digital History Lab here at CUHK has been working a lot on classical Chinese translation because it remains a little bit of a sticky issue, especially into languages that aren't modern Mandarin. So it's an interesting. It's of interest to people like us in Hong Kong, which is a sort of multilingual place. Great. Okay, so let's go down a little bit more here. Okay, so what is the most surprising thing that your computational methods have discovered?
Oh.
I guess this is perhaps coming out of, you know, I often hear this complaint or perhaps comment from older colleagues or colleagues perhaps that, you know, we're sort of sometimes we're reinventing the wheel, that perhaps the results are not all that surprising. So maybe this is someone reacting to that as well.
Yeah, I am told that a lot. Yes, it is something I've been thinking about quite a lot, because of course there's truth to this. Like, what's the point in doing all of this if you're not discovering anything new? Well, my answer to that, my general answer to that is that well, these methods are still in progress. So to be able to test them, we sort of need to have to know the answer, and so it's only encouraging that they confirm what we already knew, but they give us that quantitative dimension that we don't have. Like as I mentioned about the dictionaries, I worked in lexicography for a few years, and yes, dictionaries are wonderful resources, but they were made for humans in a kind of non-quantitative paradigm where it was important to just know that this word changed its meaning at some point. But by adding quantitative data to this, we can actually give nuances. We can look, for example, at how this change can differ in different types of text, different authors. So it's only by gathering all this data that we can do, for example, multivariate analyses. If I need to think about an example of something surprising, well, I suppose the semantic change in Twitter was a bit surprising, because we were expecting changes of similar sort to the web archive changes. But in fact, we found very, very, rapid and short-lived words. So we learned a lot about rap music, which I know nothing about, and made me feel very old, and learned about, yes, the jargon of younger people than me. So in a way, I think even though scientifically it wasn't anything that a linguist would call semantic change, culturally it was very interesting, because it gave us a method to pick up these rapid shifts that can disappear as quickly as they appear, but that we may miss completely if we don't have these methods.
But I might ask a quick follow-up here, actually. So I don't think you mentioned geographical distribution. So this is Anglophone Twitter, or all of Twitter?
Yes, thanks for asking. So yeah, we only looked at English language tweets, but we weren't able to geolocate them or at least geolocate a sufficiently large proportion to do a kind of geographic variation analysis. But there are people looking into this. There's Jack Greaves, for example, and others. So definitely the geographic dimension is one that needs to be accounted for, just like the multilingual aspect. Sure. And you'll see sometimes what you find then would be variation between regions rather than time change.
Yes, no, I asked because our English department here is a sort of a department of global English, or global English is plural, I should say. And this sort of nature of Anglophone Twitter is, there are 330 some million Americans, there were 60-70 million Brits, but English is also a lingua franca, so nailing all this down is sort of a project of my colleagues. That's great. I was wondering if we could sort of turn back to, I think it was maybe the first quotation you gave about sort of collaboration between people in digital humanities, NLP, computational linguistics. Maybe I'm missing one. And you said that sort of changed since 2017. It's got better, but could you sort of talk a little bit about that?
Actually, it gives an opportunity to give another paper I wrote called Je t'aime moi non plus, just finding the reference. So this was a paper, Digital Humanities and Natural Language Processing, Je t'aime moi non plus, which is a quotation of a song. Of course, this is the link. And where we, this was a paper from 2000, was it 2021? So already, or 20, that's already a couple of years old. I've seen this. I mean, I myself am a computational linguist, but I sit in a digital humanities department, and I regularly attend digital humanities events, and I've seen more and more talks about computational methods. In fact, I set up a computational humanities research group here at King's, and we organize events. I'm also going to send you a link, because you can sign up to our mailing list. Here's the link. And there is, I was involved in the computational humanities research, first research workshop, was kind of program committee there, program lead there, and it's turned into a conference that's going every year. This next one is in Paris in December. So there is a growing community of researchers who are trying to really bridge the gap, and who sort of pushing for more computational research in digital humanities, but also more humanities focused researchers in computational linguistics. So it's all very encouraging, and I feel like when I did my PhD, nothing like this was happening. So I can only be hopeful, and I'm regularly approached by students who with a humanities background who are looking to acquire more computational skills. I know you're of course doing a lot at your institution, and So it is a change that is happening in front of our eyes. Yeah.
And then I guess being in you mentioned before do most of your colleagues identify as digital humanists? Do you sort of congregate around methods? You know, for an audience that's arranged, you know, into an English department, history department, Japanese department, Chinese department, how does that sort of look and feel?
Yeah. Thanks for this question. It's something we're reflecting on as a department, because we've been growing a lot in past years. And so this has meant that we have people with different backgrounds. We're very different in our profiles. I think the motto of the department is critical inquiry with and about the digital. And it nicely summarizes that there are really two groups of people: the ones that work with digital methods and the ones that work about digital, write about digital methods. There's a big portion of my colleagues who you'd maybe say they do digital studies and they study digital phenomena from a sociological point of view. I hope I'm describing this correctly. It's not my area, which is why I might get the terminology slightly off, but roughly that's a distinction. Whereas me and other colleagues are more on developing, you know, computational digital methods for answering historical linguistic questions. It could be more generally humanities questions. And so, yeah, all of us, I think, feel like digital humanists, but then of course there's an ongoing debate: what is digital humanities, which everyone is terribly scared about entering. So, but there is an ongoing effort actually at the department to come up with a joint statement and output that can really summarize where we stand as a department, because we are the largest in the world and probably one of the oldest ones. So it's only natural that we've grown and sort of need to sort of focus on what we're doing. We've certainly broadened the scope a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it's a difficult question if people who are just, you know, quote, regular humanists can't quite agree what the humanities is, then, you know, what hope is there for anyone? But it's a sort of fruitful discussion, I guess, to...
I could maybe just add one point as now the new program convener of the Master's Program in Digital Humanities. I'm purposely kind of bridging connections with humanities departments and also telling, you know, students of history, English, linguistics, classics, that actually you can come here and there is, you know, we are doing humanities with digital methods. So trying to sort of shift a little bit the focus and the messaging to attract more humanists or people with more traditional humanities background, including, of course, students. So that we get to do digital humanities, for example, looking at historical data, not just you know, social media, which is super interesting too. So.
Of course, yeah. So maybe we have about 3 minutes left, it looks like. So I'm wondering if we could sort of look, I guess, more sort of present future focused. You mentioned in a sort of just in a very momentary way, I guess the change from word to vec to, you know, use of models like BERT. I know there's, you know, the Latin BERT, you know, Patrick Burns and David Bauman. You know, I'm wondering where you sort of see things going from here. What's the sort of exciting work happening in your sort of field, as it were?
Yeah, well, I didn't mention large language models, and of course they are on everyone's minds at the moment. I think it's a bit scary, but also very exciting to see where this can lead us. I myself want to I haven't, but I want to start looking at how large language models can be used for this type of research on historical languages. yeah, so I think that's probably the next thing from a technical point of view. The discomfort with these methods is that they are really increasingly uninterpretable and more like black boxes. So I think we'll have to sort of really keep that in mind and use them critically. And alongside the application of these methods, we also need to really be investing in annotation and interpretation of human interpretation of the data, because we certainly don't want to sort of rely on models that are stochastic and black boxes to give us results of our research. So it's going to be increasingly important to really have the human in the loop.
And one of the things my students always ask me about is sort of generative AI. Can you sort of foresee a sort of generative AI that can write, another book of Virgil, or?
Yeah, I tried asking ChatGPT for the genre of certain Latin texts, and it did very well, actually. Yeah. Well, I guess. Yeah, I'll have to think about that one, because we'd need to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate aim of classics research? And is this it certainly would be fun to see how we could sort of convey maybe even contemporary concepts with Virgil's language or something like this. But then, yeah, what are we trying to do? And is this what's the distinction between the fun aspect and our research purpose? And yeah, is this gamification leading us somewhere productive? I really don't have answers, but yeah, I'll be thinking a lot about this.
Great. Well, it is just about 7:30 p.m. here in Hong Kong. I guess the clocks have switched back home. So is it 12:30?
It's 11:30.
11:30, yes. Yeah, in the UK. So I guess all that remains for us to do is to thank our speaker for her time. It was a wonderfully enlightening talk, and to wish everyone, wherever they are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good night.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks so much. Bye.